She receives an inheritance from her father. He has left her a mysterious and abandoned mansion with a secret room. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels against the tracks served as a soothing backdrop to Catherine Bennett's contemplations. She gazed out the window at the passing countryside, where fields of golden wheat swayed gently under the caress of a late summer breeze. Distant hills rose and fell like gentle waves, their peaks kissed by the afternoon sun that cast a warm, honeyed glow over the landscape. Catherine adjusted her position on the worn velvet seat, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the embossed initials on the weathered leather journal resting on her lap. J.B., her father's. The journal was one of the few possessions she had taken with her when she left Willow Creek 10 years ago, vowing never to return. Yet here she was, drawn back to the small town by a terse telegram that arrived 2 days prior. Urgent, matter of estate, return immediately. Regards, Thomas Worthington, Askew. She sighed, her breath fogging the glass momentarily before dissipating. The thought of confronting the ghosts of her past filled her with a mix of dread and curiosity. Memories flooded back, her father's stern visage softened by rare moments of tenderness, the laughter of friends long estranged, and the whispering willows by the riverbank where she used to spend hours sketching. The train lurched slightly as it began to decelerate, the conductor's voice echoing through the carriage. Next stop, Willow Creek Station. Catherine gathered her belongings, a modest suitcase in her satchel, and prepared herself mentally for what lay ahead. As the train pulled into the station, she caught sight of the familiar platform, unchanged by time. The wrought iron lampposts still stood sentinel, their peeling paint and gas lanterns harking back to an earlier era. A handful of passengers disembarked, greeted by loved ones or hurrying off to their destinations. Stepping onto the platform, she was immediately enveloped by the distinct scent of her hometown, a blend of fresh pine, blooming wildflowers, and the faint hint of coal smoke from the blacksmith's forge. The sounds of chirping birds and distant laughter mingled with the clamor of porters unloading luggage. "Miss Bennett!" a voice called out, hesitant yet hopeful. She turned to see a young man approaching, perhaps in his late 20s, with tousled chestnut hair and earnest hazel eyes behind a pair of round spectacles. He was dressed in a well-tailored but slightly rumpled suit, a stack of papers clutched under one arm. "Yes, I'm Catherine Bennett," she replied, offering a polite smile. He extended his hand. "Edward Whitmore, associate at Worthington and Associates. Mr. Worthington sent me to escort you to his office." She shook his hand, noting the firm but gentle grip. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I appreciate the assistance." "Please, call me Edward," he said, a hint of a blush creeping up his neck. "Do you have any other luggage?" "Just this," she gestured to her suitcase. "Allow me," Edward insisted, taking the suitcase from her before she could protest. They made their way through the station, weaving between clusters of passengers and porters. As they stepped outside, Catherine paused to take in the town. Willow Creek stretched before her, a tapestry of cobblestone streets lined with quaint shops, their colorful awnings fluttering in the breeze. Horse-drawn carriages clip-clopped along the roads, and townsfolk milled about, some casting curious glances her way. "Not much has changed," she mused aloud. Edward glanced at her. "I suppose in some ways it hasn't, though we do have a new clock tower in the town square." She smiled faintly. "Progress marches on." They approached a waiting carriage, its black lacquered exterior gleaming. Edward helped her inside before climbing in himself. As the carriage set off, Catherine watched the familiar sights pass by: the bakery with its enticing aroma of fresh bread, the apothecary where she used to accompany her mother, the schoolhouse with its red door. "May I ask how long you've been away?" Edward ventured, breaking the silence. 10 years, she replied, her gaze fixed out the window. "I left shortly after my father's passing." "My condolences," he said sincerely. "I wasn't in Willow Creek at the time, but I've heard he was a respected man." "He was," Catherine affirmed softly, "respected and feared in equal measure." Edward shifted uncomfortably, sensing the undercurrents of emotion. "Mr. Worthington didn't provide many details in his telegram. He only mentioned that it concerned your family's estate." Yes, the estate, she said, her tone tinged with bitterness. I was under the impression that everything was settled years ago. Apparently, new information has come to light, Edward explained, but I'm not privy to the specifics. She turned to look at him, studying his earnest expression. And what brings you to work in such a small town, Edward? You seem like someone who could make a name for himself in the city. He chuckled lightly. Perhaps, but I find Willow Creek charming. There's a sense of community here that's hard to find elsewhere. Besides, my family is from the area. I see, she said, nodding thoughtfully. The carriage pulled up in front of a stately brick building adorned with ivy, Worthington and Associates. Edward alighted first, extending a hand to help her down. After you, he gestured toward the entrance. Inside the office was a blend of polished wood, rich carpets, and walls lined with bookshelves overflowing with legal volumes. A stern-looking receptionist eyed them over her spectacles. Miss Bennett to see Mr. Worthington, Edward informed her. He's expecting you, the receptionist replied, motioning toward a heavy oak door at the end of the hallway. Edward knocked lightly before opening the door for Catherine. The office beyond was spacious, with large windows that bathed the room in natural light. Thomas Worthington stood as they entered, a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and a meticulously groomed mustache. He wore a tailored suit that spoke of refinement and tradition. Miss Bennett, he greeted warmly, extending his hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Mr. Worthington, she replied, shaking his hand. I must admit, your telegram was rather abrupt. He offered an apologetic smile. Yes, my apologies. The matter at hand is of some urgency, and I felt it best to discuss it in person. Very well, she said, taking a seat in the plush chair he indicated. Edward excused himself quietly, closing the door behind him. Mr. Worthington settled into his chair, folding his hands atop the mahogany desk. I will get straight to the point. It appears that your father left a codicil to his will, which has only recently come to light. Catherine raised an eyebrow. A codicil? After all these years? Indeed. It was discovered in a safety deposit box at the local bank, the key to which was found among the personal effects of Mr. Harris, the former bank manager, upon his recent passing. She frowned slightly. And what does this codicil entail? Mr. Worthington adjusted his spectacles. In essence, it bequeaths to you a property that was not included in the original will, a manor house on the outskirts of town known as Rosewood Estate. Rosewood Estate? Catherine echoed, surprise evident in her voice. I wasn't aware my father owned such a property. Few were, he acknowledged. It's a secluded place, long uninhabited. Your father acquired it under somewhat confidential circumstances. She considered this new information. Why would he keep it a secret? That I cannot say, Mr. Worthington admitted. However, the codicil specifies that the estate is to pass to you on the condition that you take up residence there for a period of no less than 1 year. Catherine's eyes narrowed. A condition? That seems rather unconventional. Yes, but not entirely unheard of in matters of inheritance, he pointed out. Should you decline, the property will be sold, and the proceeds donated to a beneficiary named therein, a Mr. Reginald Thompson. She searched her memory. I don't recall any Thompson in my father's circle. Nor do I, he said, which adds to the peculiarity. Catherine sat back, absorbing the situation. What do you recommend, Mr. Worthington? He leaned forward slightly. As your father's legal representative, I advise that you at least visit the estate. Perhaps there are answers to be found there. And as your father's only heir, it would be prudent to assess the property's value before making any decisions. She nodded slowly. Very well. I'll visit Rosewood Estate. Excellent, he replied, a hint of relief in his tone. I can arrange for Edward to accompany you tomorrow. He's familiar with the area and can assist with any needs you may have. Thank you, she said, standing. I appreciate your guidance. As she left the office, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. The secrecy surrounding the estate, the mysterious beneficiary, questions swirled in her mind like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the cobblestone street. Edward was waiting by the carriage, a tentative smile on his face. "How did it go?" he inquired. "Intriguing, to say the least," she replied. "It seems I have inherited a property, Rosewood Estate." His eyebrows shot up. "Rosewood? That's quite the place, though it's been abandoned for years." "So I've been told," she said thoughtfully. "Mr. Worthington mentioned that you could accompany me there tomorrow." "Of course," he agreed readily. "It would be my pleasure." She glanced around, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. "In the meantime, I suppose I should find accommodations." Edward hesitated before speaking. "If you'd like, the Willow Creek Inn is just around the corner. It's modest but comfortable." "Thank you, I'll take your recommendation." He escorted her to the inn, a charming establishment with ivy-covered walls and welcoming lanterns by the entrance. After securing a room, she found herself alone at last, the quietude of the space allowing her thoughts to surface fully. Settling into the armchair by the window, Catherine opened her father's journal. The pages were filled with his meticulous handwriting, notes on business dealings, personal reflections, sketches of mechanical devices. She flipped through, searching for any mention of Rosewood Estate. Toward the back of the journal, she discovered a passage dated shortly before his death. "The shadows lengthen, and the weight of secrets grows heavier. Rosewood remains the key. A legacy I am uncertain I should pass on. But perhaps Catherine will succeed where I have not. Time will tell." Her heart quickened. What secrets had her father harbored, and what role did Rosewood play in them? Determined to uncover the truth, she closed the journal and prepared herself for the journey ahead. Tomorrow would bring her face to face with the past she thought she'd left behind, and perhaps with revelations that could alter the course of her future. As night enveloped Willow Creek, Catherine gazed out at the town's flickering lights. A tapestry of her old life, interwoven with the unknown paths that beckon. The distant hoot of an owl echoed, a solitary sound that mirrored her own sense of solitude. Climbing into bed, she resolved to meet whatever awaited her with courage and clarity. Sleep came slowly, her dreams a collage of fragmented images. A grand manor shrouded in mist, her father's enigmatic smile, and the haunting melody of a piano playing somewhere just out of reach. When dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Catherine awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. She dressed swiftly, anticipation and apprehension entwined within her. Downstairs, she found Edward waiting in the dining room, sipping a cup of tea. He stood as she approached. "Good morning, Miss Bennet. I trust you slept well?" "Well enough," she replied. "Shall we be off?" He nodded. "I've arranged for a carriage. It's a bit of a journey to Rosewood, about an hour's ride." As they set out, the carriage wound its way through the outskirts of town, the scenery gradually shifting from cultivated fields to wilder terrain. Dense woods bordered the narrow road, the canopy above filtering sunlight into dapples that danced across their path. Catherine broke the silence. "What can you tell me about Rosewood Estate?" Edward considered before responding. "It's an old manor dating back several centuries. Rumors abound. Some say it's haunted, others that it's cursed." She raised an eyebrow. "And what do you believe?" He smiled wryly. "I'm a man of reason, Miss Bennet. I believe that old houses creak and shadows can play tricks on the mind." "Fair enough," she conceded, "but there must be some basis for such tales." "Perhaps," he allowed, "though it may simply be that an empty house invites stories to fill the void." They fell into a companionable silence as the road narrowed further, the trees closing in like silent sentinels. At length, the carriage emerged into a clearing, and Rosewood Estate came into view. The manor stood atop a gentle rise, its stone facade weathered but imposing. Ivy clung to the walls, and tall windows gazed outward like eyes keeping watch. A wrought iron gate barred the entrance, ornate and intricate, with the initials R.E. entwined at its center. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crisp morning air. There was a solemn grandeur to the place, a sense of history steeped into every stone. Edward assisted her from the carriage. "Welcome to Rosewood," he said quietly. She approached the gate, her hand resting on the cold metal. "Do you have the key?" He produced an old-fashioned iron key from his pocket. "Mr. Worthington provided it." The gate swung open with a reluctant groan. As they made their way up the overgrown path toward the front entrance, the crunch of gravel underfoot seemed unnaturally loud. At the massive wooden door, Edward unlocked it, and they stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light that pierced the gloom, and the scent of aged wood and faded opulence filled the air. The grand foyer stretched before them, with a sweeping staircase ascending to the upper floors. Portraits lined the walls, stern faces of men and women from another era, their eyes seeming to follow the newcomers. "Remarkable," Edward breathed. "It's as if time has stood still." Catherine wandered further in, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. She felt a strange pull, as though the house recognized her. Turning to a nearby table, she noticed a silver candlestick engraved with the Bennet family crest. "Edward," she called softly, "look at this." He joined her, his gaze following hers. "Your family's crest. But how?" "Exactly," she murmured. "My family has a connection to this place deeper than I realized." Exploring further, they entered what appeared to be a study. Shelves laden with books lined the walls, and a massive desk sat before a mullioned window overlooking the grounds. Catherine approached the desk, noting a journal lying open, the ink faded but legible. She recognized her father's handwriting. "To whomever finds this, know that the truth lies hidden beneath the foundations, where shadows meet the light. Seek the rose etched in stone." Her pulse quickened. "Edward, I think my father left a message for me." He read the passage, his expression thoughtful. "It sounds like a clue." "Yes," she agreed. "But to what?" They continued their search, eventually descending to the cellar. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the scent of earth and stone intensified. At the far end of the cellar, they discovered a wall where a single stone bore the carving of a rose. "Here," Catherine whispered, her fingers tracing the delicate lines. She pressed against the stone, and with a grating sound, a section of the wall shifted, revealing a hidden passage. Edward held up a lantern he'd found earlier. "Shall we?" Taking a steadying breath, she nodded. "Let's find out what my father wanted me to see." They stepped into the passage, the lantern casting flickering shadows on the damp walls. The corridor led them to a chamber where a small chest rested atop a pedestal. Catherine approached it cautiously. The chest was unadorned save for a lock that matched the key she carried, the key to her father's journal. She inserted the key, and with a soft click, the chest opened. Inside lay a stack of letters and a locket bearing a portrait of a woman she did not recognize. Unfolding the first letter, she began to read. As the words unfolded, a story of love, betrayal, and hidden lineage emerged, a truth that challenged everything she thought she knew about her family. Tears welled in her eyes as the realization set in. "My father, he wasn't the man I believed him to be." Edward placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes the past holds secrets we aren't prepared for." She looked up at him, resolve hardening her features. "I need to uncover the whole truth, whatever it may be." He nodded. "And I'll help you every step of the way." As they made their way back to the surface, the weight of newfound knowledge pressed upon Catherine. The journey she had embarked upon was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Standing at the threshold of Rosewood Estate, she gazed out at the sprawling grounds, the sun now high in the sky. The shadows had retreated, but the mysteries remained. "Are you ready to face what lies ahead?" Edward asked gently. She took a deep breath, her eyes reflecting a determination. "Yes, it's time to confront the legacy my father left behind, and to forge my own path forward." Together they stepped into the light, the future unwritten and the possibilities endless. The afternoon sun cast elongated shadows across the grounds of Rosewood Estate as Catherine and Edward stood outside the manor, the weight of the discovery settling upon them. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of ancient oaks that lined the drive, their branches stretching like skeletal arms toward the azure sky. Catherine clutched the locket found in the hidden chamber, its cool metal warming slightly in her palm. The portrait within depicted a woman of striking beauty, Dark curls framed a face with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold a secret. It was a face unfamiliar to Catherine, yet there was an inexplicable sense of connection. "We should return to town," Edward suggested gently. "Perhaps Mr. Worthington can shed some light on these documents." She nodded absently, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the sun dipped ever lower. Yes, perhaps he can. As they made their way back to the carriage, a figure emerged from the edge of the woods bordering the estate, a woman in a simple dress, her auburn hair pulled back loosely. She appeared startled upon seeing them, hesitating before approaching. "Excuse me," the woman called out tentatively. "Are you the new owners of Rosewood?" Catherine exchanged a glance with Edward before replying, "I am Catherine Bennett, and you are?" "I'm Margaret Taylor," she said, offering a shy smile. "I live in the cottage just beyond the hill." She gestured vaguely behind her. "I didn't mean to intrude, it's been so long since anyone visited the manor." Catherine studied her, noting the flecks of green in her hazel eyes and the smudge of dirt on her cheek, as though she'd been tending a garden. "It's quite all right. I wasn't aware there were other residences nearby." Margaret nodded. "My family has lived here for generations, caretakers of sorts, though in recent years there's been little to tend to." "Did you know my father?" Catherine inquired. A shadow passed over Margaret's face. "I knew of him, but we never met formally. My mother, however, spoke of him on occasion." "Your mother?" "Yes," Margaret hesitated. She worked here many years ago." Catherine's curiosity piqued. "Is your mother still living?" A sadness settled in Margaret's eyes. "She passed away last winter." "I'm sorry to hear that," Catherine offered sincerely. "Perhaps you and I could talk more. There are questions I have about Rosewood and its history." Margaret brightened slightly. "I would like that. You're welcome to visit the cottage anytime." "Thank you," Catherine replied. "I may take you up on that." As Margaret departed, disappearing along a narrow path that wound into the trees, Edward turned to Catherine. "What do you make of her?" "I'm not sure," she admitted, "but I have a feeling she may hold pieces of this puzzle." They boarded the carriage, and as it rumbled back toward Willow Creek, Catherine pondered the layers of mystery that seemed to deepen with each new encounter. Upon reaching town, they headed directly to Worthington and Associates. Mr. Worthington was surprised by their return, but ushered them into his office without delay. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Whitmore," he greeted them. "I trust your visit to Rosewood was enlightening." "Indeed," Catherine replied, placing the letters and locket on his desk. "We discovered these hidden in a chamber beneath the manor. They raise more questions than answers." Mr. Worthington adjusted his spectacles, examining the items carefully. "Fascinating. May I?" "Please." She gestured for him to proceed. He unfolded one of the letters, his eyes scanning the text. As he read, his expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "This is quite unexpected," he murmured. "So now, what do you know of this, Mr. Worthington?" Catherine pressed. He sighed heavily, setting the letter down. "Your father was a private man, Miss Bennett, but I was aware of certain complexities in his life." "What kind of complexities?" He glanced at Edward before continuing. "It appears that the woman in the portrait is Eliza Harrington, a name that may not mean much to you but was once well known in these parts." "Who was she?" Catherine asked. "She was a singer at the Magnolia Theater, renowned for her voice and beauty. Your father was quite taken with her." Catherine felt a tightening in her chest. "Are you implying they had a relationship?" Mr. Worthington nodded solemnly. "Yes, a passionate but clandestine affair. Such liaisons were frowned upon, given the social divides of the time." Edward interjected gently. "But why keep this a secret for so long?" "Because," Mr. Worthington said gravely, "there was a child." The room fell into a stunned silence. Catherine's mind raced. "A child? You mean I have a sibling?" "Half-sibling, to be precise," he confirmed. "A daughter. Your father confided in me shortly before his passing, but swore me to secrecy unless certain conditions were met." Catherine rose from her chair, pacing toward the window. "This is overwhelming." Edward stood as well, concern evident on his face. "Are you all right?" She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I just need a moment. Turning back to Mr. Worthington, she asked, why reveal this now? Because the codicil to your father's will was contingent upon you uncovering the truth, he explained. He believed that Rosewood held the key to reconciling the past. Catherine's thoughts flashed to Margaret. The resemblance, the familiarity. Margaret Taylor, she whispered. Who? Edward asked. A young woman we met at the estate. She lives nearby. I believe she may be the child. Mr. Worthington looked thoughtful. It's possible. Eliza Harrington disappeared from public life around the time your father acquired Rosewood. Perhaps she sought refuge there. Catherine felt a surge of determination. I need to speak with Margaret again. Do you wish for me to accompany you? Edward offered. She shook her head. Thank you, but I think this is something I must do alone. Mr. Worthington rose, his expression gentle. If there's anything I can do to assist, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, she replied, gathering the letters and locket. I appreciate your candor. Leaving the office, Catherine felt a whirlwind of emotions, shock, anger, curiosity, and a glimmer of hope. The streets of Willow Creek blurred as she made her way back to the inn, her mind consumed by the revelations. That evening, she sat by the fireplace in the inn's cozy parlor, the warmth of the flames doing little to dispel the chill she felt inside. Unfolding one of the letters, she read her father's words. My dearest Eliza, the weight of our choices bears heavily upon me. I long for a world where we could be together openly, where our child could know a life free of shadows. Rosewood shall be our sanctuary, a place untouched by the constraints of society. Until then, know that my heart is ever yours. Asterisk. Tears welled in her eyes. This was a side of her father she had never known, a man capable of deep love and vulnerability. The following morning, Catherine set out early for Rosewood Estate, the dawn casting a soft glow over the landscape. She followed the path Margaret had taken, winding through the woods until she reached a quaint cottage nestled among the trees. Knocking lightly on the door, she waited, her heart pounding. After a moment, Margaret opened the door, surprise registering on her face. Miss Bennet, she greeted. I didn't expect to see you so soon. May I come in? Catherine asked gently. There's something important we need to discuss. Margaret hesitated briefly before stepping aside. Of course. Inside, the cottage was modest but cozy. A stone hearth dominated one wall, and the scent of fresh bread lingered in the air. They sat at a small wooden table, adorned with a simple vase of wildflowers. Catherine took a deep breath. I believe we may be sisters. Margaret's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and confusion. I don't understand. She placed the locket and letters on the table. I found these at Rosewood. They reveal a relationship between my father and your mother, Eliza Harrington. Margaret stared at the items, her hands trembling as she picked up the locket. This was my mother's, she whispered. Catherine reached out, her voice softening. I had no idea until yesterday. Our father kept this hidden from me, but it seems he wanted us to find each other. Tears streamed down Margaret's cheeks. She told me stories of a man she loved but could never be with. I always thought they were just tales. It's real, Catherine affirmed, and I want to know more. About her. About you. Margaret looked up, hope and uncertainty mingling in her gaze. I never imagined. Nor did I, Catherine admitted. But perhaps we can navigate this together. They spent hours sharing stories, Margaret recounting her mother's life after leaving the stage, Catherine revealing her own experiences growing up under their father's roof. Despite the different paths their lives had taken, they found common ground in their shared heritage and the complexities of their family's past. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue through the cottage windows, Catherine extended an invitation. Come to Rosewood with me. Let's reclaim what was kept from us. Margaret hesitated. Do you think it's possible? I do, Catherine assured her. We can restore the estate, breathe new life into it. Perhaps it's what our parents would have wanted. A tentative smile spread across Margaret's face. I'd like that. Leaving the cottage together, they walked back to Rosewood Estate, the air filled with the promise of a new beginning. The manor seemed less imposing now, its windows reflecting the warm light of the fading day. Edward awaited them at the entrance, a look of relief crossing his features upon seeing Catherine. "I was beginning to worry." "Edward," she greeted him warmly, "I'd like you to meet Margaret, my sister." He smiled graciously. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Taylor." "Please, call me Margaret," she replied, a hint of shyness returning. They entered the manor, and for the first time, Catherine felt a sense of belonging within its walls. The shadows seemed less daunting, the silence more peaceful. As they explored the rooms, ideas blossomed, transforming the estate into a home, perhaps even opening its doors to the community. Together, they envisioned gardens blooming once more, laughter echoing through the halls, and the legacy of their family being one of unity rather than secrecy. That night, as the sisters sat by the fireplace in the grand parlor, Catherine turned to Margaret. "I never imagined my return to Willow Creek would lead to this." "Neither did I," Margaret agreed softly, "but I'm glad it did." Catherine smiled, a genuine warmth radiating from her. "Me too." The embers glowed brightly, casting a gentle light over them. Outside, the stars dotted the sky like scattered diamonds, bearing silent witness to the unfolding of a story long overdue. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity at Rosewood Estate. Catherine and Margaret worked side by side, breathing life back into the manor that had long stood dormant. Tradesmen were hired to repair the roof and restore the faded grandeur of the interiors. Gardens were cleared of overgrowth, revealing the skeletal remains of once beautiful landscapes eager to bloom again. Edward became a frequent visitor, offering assistance and companionship. His rapport with both sisters grew, his gentle demeanor and keen insights invaluable during the restoration process. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the estate in a warm glow, the trio gathered in the library. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the tall windows, and the scent of old books mingled with the freshness of the polished wood. "There's something I'd like to show you both," Edward announced, a hint of excitement in his voice. Catherine looked up from the ledger she was reviewing. "Oh, what is it?" He produced a rolled parchment tied with a faded ribbon. "I came across this in the town archives. It's an original blueprint of Rosewood Estate." Margaret leaned in, her eyes alight with curiosity. "May I see?" Edward unfurled the parchment across the large oak table. The intricate drawings depicted not only the layout of the manor, but also extensive notes and annotations in a meticulous hand. "This handwriting," Catherine observed, "it looks familiar." "That's because it's your grandfather's," Edward revealed. "James Bennett." Catherine's eyes widened. "I never knew he was involved in the estate's design." "Nor did I," Margaret added, tracing a finger over the delicate lines. Edward pointed to a section marked with a symbol, a rose entwined with a key. "I believe this indicates a hidden room or passage." Catherine's heart quickened. "Another secret? It seems our family had a penchant for them." Margaret smiled softly. "Perhaps it's an opportunity to uncover more of our history." They studied the blueprint, determining that the symbol corresponded to an area near the east wing's turret. "Shall we investigate?" Edward suggested. "Absolutely," Catherine agreed. They made their way through the manor, the excitement of discovery invigorating them. Reaching the east wing, they examined the walls for any sign of an entry point. "Here," Margaret said, noticing a slight irregularity in the paneling. Upon closer inspection, they found a hidden latch concealed within the carved molding. With a firm press, a section of the wall clicked open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling upward. Edward retrieved a lantern. "Allow me to lead the way." They ascended carefully, the air growing cooler as they climbed. At the top, the staircase opened into a circular chamber, surrounded by windows that offered panoramic views of the estate and the surrounding countryside. "It's beautiful," Margaret breathed, gazing out at the rolling hills and distant forests. In the center of the room stood a pedestal bearing a leather-bound journal embossed with the Bennett family crest. Catherine approached it reverently. "Another journal," she whispered. She opened it to the first page where an inscription read, "To my descendants, may the knowledge contained herein guide you through the trials of life and lead you to the truth that binds our family. 'Tis James Bennett." Turning the pages, they found detailed accounts of James Bennett's life, his aspirations, his challenges, and his hopes for the future generations. One passage caught Catherine's attention. The choices we make ripple through time, affecting those who come after us. It is my hope that forgiveness and understanding will heal the fractures within our lineage. She looked up, meeting Margaret's gaze. It seems the secrets and divisions in our family go back further than we thought. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. But perhaps we can be the ones to break the cycle. Edward smiled gently. You already are. They spent hours poring over the journal, unraveling stories of love and loss, triumphs and regrets. The more they learned, the more they felt connected, not only to their ancestors, but to each other. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, they descended from the tower feeling both humbled and inspired. Back in the main hall, they found Mrs. Whitfield, the housekeeper they had recently hired, waiting for them. Miss Bennet, Miss Taylor, she greeted them warmly. Dinner is ready whenever you are. Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield, Catherine replied. We'll be along shortly. After she departed, Catherine turned to Margaret and Edward. I propose a toast at dinner, to new beginnings and the bonds we've forged. Agreed, Margaret said, her eyes reflecting the flicker of candlelight. During the meal, laughter and light-hearted conversation filled the dining room, a stark contrast to the silence that once pervaded the manor. Catherine raised her glass. To family, by blood and by choice, may we continue to support and uplift one another. To family, they echoed, clinking glasses. The days that followed were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Catherine and Margaret decided to host a gathering for the townspeople, a way to reintroduce Rosewood Estate to the community and dispel any lingering shadows. Invitations were sent and preparations began in earnest. The manor was adorned with flowers from the revitalized gardens, and musicians were hired to fill the halls with melodies. On the evening of the event, guests arrived in their finest attire, curiosity and excitement evident. The sisters greeted each person warmly, their grace and genuine hospitality leaving a favorable impression. As the night unfolded, the manor buzzed with life. Conversations flowed easily, and the barriers that once separated the Bennet family from the townspeople began to dissolve. Catherine found herself in a conversation with Mrs. Aldridge, the mayor's wife. It's a delight to see Rosewood restored, Mrs. Aldridge remarked. Your parents would be proud. Thank you, Catherine replied sincerely. It's been a labor of love. And your sister, Mrs. Aldridge continued, glancing toward Margaret, who was engaged in animated discussion with a group of guests. She's a charming young woman. She is, Catherine agreed, warmth filling her voice. Edward approached them, a glass of champagne in hand. Enjoying the evening? Very much, Catherine affirmed. It's gratifying to see everyone coming together. He smiled. You've created something wonderful here. She looked at him appreciatively. We couldn't have done it without your support. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret joined them. What a success, she exclaimed softly. I feel as though we've turned a new page. Indeed, Edward concurred. The trio stepped out onto the terrace, the cool night air refreshing after the warmth of the crowded rooms. Stars glittered overhead, and the distant sounds of laughter and music drifted on the breeze. Catherine took a deep breath, contentment settling over her. I think our parents would be happy to see us here, together. Margaret linked her arm with Catherine's. I believe so too. Edward gazed at them fondly. You both have shown remarkable strength and kindness. It's been an honor to be part of this journey. Catherine met his eyes, a hint of something unspoken passing between them. The honor has been ours. As summer gave way to the vibrant hues of autumn, life at Rosewood Estate settled into a harmonious rhythm. The sisters delved into philanthropic endeavors, using the estate as a base for community programs, literacy initiatives, art workshops, and gatherings that fostered unity within Willow Creek. One crisp morning, Catherine received a letter bearing the seal of the London Historical Society. Intrigued, she opened it to find an invitation to present a lecture on the restoration of Rosewood and the discovery of her family's historical documents. This is quite an honor, Edward remarked when she shared the news. The society is highly esteemed. Margaret beamed. You must accept. Catherine hesitated. It would mean traveling to London for several weeks. There's so much to be done here. Margaret placed a reassuring hand on her arm. We can manage in your absence. This is a wonderful opportunity. Edward nodded. I agree. Your insights could inspire others undertaking similar endeavors. She considered their encouragement. Perhaps you're right. Preparations were made, and soon Catherine found herself aboard a train bound for London. The city was a whirlwind of activity compared to the tranquil life she had grown accustomed to, but she embraced the change with enthusiasm. The lecture was well received, sparking engaging discussions and new connections. Catherine was lauded for her dedication to preserving history and fostering community engagement. Amidst the success, she couldn't shake a growing restlessness. Letters from Margaret detailed the goings-on at Rosewood, but there was an undercurrent of concern that Catherine couldn't quite place. One evening, as she strolled along the Thames, she encountered an old acquaintance, Jonathan Pierce, a charismatic and ambitious entrepreneur she had known during her years away from Willow Creek. Catherine Bennett, he exclaimed upon recognizing her. What a pleasant surprise. Jonathan, she greeted him politely. It's been a while. They conversed amiably, and he shared news of his latest ventures. I'm actually looking to expand into the countryside, he mentioned. Opportunities abound for those willing to invest. She smiled faintly. I'm sure you'll succeed. You always had a knack for business. He regarded her thoughtfully. You know, with your connections and reputation, we could form a profitable partnership? Catherine's brow furrowed slightly. In what capacity? Imagine transforming Rosewood Estate into an exclusive resort, he proposed, preserving its charm while introducing modern luxuries. It would attract the elite from all over. She felt a pang of unease. Rosewood is our home, Jonathan, and we've dedicated it to serving the community. He dismissed her concern with a wave. Think bigger, Catherine. There's potential for so much more. I appreciate your confidence, but I'm content with our current path, she replied firmly. He sighed, a hint of frustration creeping into his tone. Very well, but if you change your mind, the offer stands. Returning to her lodgings that night, Catherine reflected on the encounter. The allure of success and recognition was tempting, but it clashed with the values she and Margaret had cultivated. A letter awaited her upon arrival, this one from Edward. Dear Catherine, I hope this finds you well. There's a matter of some urgency that requires your attention at Rosewood. Please return at your earliest convenience. Yours sincerely, Edward Whitmore. Concern blossomed into anxiety. She packed her belongings swiftly and arranged for the earliest departure. Upon arriving back at Willow Creek, Catherine was greeted by a somber Edward. What's happened? She demanded. It's Margaret, he began gently. She's fallen ill. Catherine's heart sank. How serious is it? She's resting, but the physician is concerned. It's a fever that hasn't subsided. She hurried to Margaret's bedside, where her sister lay pale and fragile against the pillows. Catherine, Margaret whispered weakly upon seeing her. You're back. I'm here, Catherine assured her, taking her hand, and we're going to get you well. Over the next several days, Catherine rarely left Margaret's side. Edward coordinated with the physician, and Mrs. Whitfield ensured the household continued to run smoothly. One evening, as Catherine sat by the dim glow of a bedside lamp, Margaret's eyes fluttered open. I've been meaning to tell you, Margaret murmured. Shh, Catherine soothed. Save your strength. No, she insisted softly. I need you to know how grateful I am. You've given me a family, a home. Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. We're sisters. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you. Margaret smiled faintly. Promise me you'll continue our work no matter what happens. Don't talk like that, Catherine implored. You're going to recover. Promise me, Margaret persisted. Catherine swallowed hard. I promise. Margaret squeezed her hand gently before drifting back into sleep. The following morning, the physician had encouraging news. Her fever has broken. With rest and care, I believe she'll make a full recovery. Relief washed over Catherine like a tide. She thanked him profusely. As Margaret regained her strength in the weeks that followed, Life at Rosewood began to normalize. Yet the experience had left Catherine contemplative. One afternoon, she sought Edward's company in the gardens. "There's something I've been considering," she began. He looked at her attentively. "What is it?" "I've realized how fragile life can be, and how important it is to stay true to what matters." He nodded thoughtfully. "I couldn't agree more." She took a deep breath. "I've been offered opportunities that could bring prestige and wealth, but they come at a cost I'm not willing to pay." "You're referring to Jonathan Pierce's proposal," Edward surmised. She raised an eyebrow. "How did you know?" "He wrote to me, seeking my endorsement," Edward admitted. "I declined." Catherine smiled appreciatively. "Thank you." He met her gaze steadily. "Your vision for Rosewood is noble. It's a beacon of hope for many." She felt a warmth spread through her. "Edward, you've been a steadfast friend and ally. I value your counsel more than you know." A moment of silence stretched between them, laden with unspoken feelings. He finally spoke, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "Catherine, there's something I must tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes?" "These past months have been some of the most meaningful of my life. Working alongside you, witnessing your compassion and strength, it's deepened my admiration into something more." She felt her cheeks flush. "Edward," he continued gently, "I don't wish to presume, but I needed you to know." Catherine searched his eyes, finding sincerity and tenderness. I feel the same." A smile of genuine happiness spread across his face. "You do?" She nodded, a sense of joy bubbling within her. "Yes, I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to express it, given all that's happened." He reached for her hand tentatively. "May I?" She placed her hand in his, the contact sending a thrill through her. "You may." They stood together amid the blooming roses, the future suddenly brighter and full of promise. Winter descended upon Willow Creek, blanketing the town and countryside in a pristine layer of snow. Rosewood Estate took on a fairy tale quality, its turrets and gables adorned with icicles that glinted in the pale sunlight. Inside, the manor was a haven of warmth and cheer. Fires crackled in the hearths, and the scent of evergreen and spiced cider filled the air. Preparations were underway for a holiday celebration, one that would bring together friends and neighbors in a spirit of gratitude and fellowship. Margaret, fully recovered and more vibrant than ever, oversaw the decorating of the grand hall. "The garlands need a touch more ribbon," she instructed a group of eager helpers, "and the candles should be arranged evenly along the mantel." Catherine watched her sister with affection. "You've become quite the event coordinator." Margaret laughed lightly. "I had an excellent teacher." Edward entered, dusting snow from his coat. "The musicians have arrived and are setting up in the music room." "Wonderful," Catherine replied. "Everything is coming together nicely." He approached her with a twinkle in his eye. "I have a surprise for you." "Oh," she arched an eyebrow playfully. He presented a small box tied with a crimson ribbon. An early gift. Curiosity piqued, she untied the ribbon and opened the box to reveal a delicate silver pendant shaped like a rose entwined with a key, the symbol from her grandfather's blueprint. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Where did you find this?" "I commissioned it from a local artisan," he explained. "A symbol of your family's legacy and the new chapters you're writing." She looked up at him, emotion welling in her chest. "Thank you, Edward. It's perfect." He smiled warmly. "May I?" She turned, and he fastened the pendant around her neck, his fingers brushing lightly against her skin. Margaret observed the exchange from across the room, a knowing smile on her lips. As evening fell, guests began to arrive, their laughter and voices filling the manor with life. The celebration was a resounding success. Music flowed, delectable dishes were savored, and stories were shared by the glow of candlelight. At one point, Catherine found herself standing by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered grounds bathed in moonlight. Edward joined her quietly. "Penny for your thoughts," he offered. She glanced at him with a smile. "I was just reflecting on how much has changed in such a short time. How far we've all come." He nodded. It's remarkable, isn't it? The twists and turns life takes. She took a deep breath. I've been considering what the future holds. For Rosewood, for us. And what have you concluded? He asked gently. That I want to continue building upon what we've started here, she said with conviction. To expand our outreach, perhaps establish a foundation in our family's name. He regarded her with admiration. An excellent idea. I have no doubt it will make a significant impact. She turned to face him fully. I'd like you to be a part of it, officially, as a partner. His eyes softened. Nothing would make me happier. Margaret approached them, her cheeks flushed with happiness. There you two are. Everyone's gathering for a toast. They joined the others in the grand hall, where glasses were raised high. Catherine stepped forward to address the crowd. Friends, neighbors, family. It brings me immense joy to see us all gathered here tonight. This manor has transformed from a relic of the past into a place of hope and community, thanks to each and every one of you. Applause rippled through the room. She continued, as we look to the new year, I'm excited to announce the establishment of the Bennett Foundation, dedicated to education, the arts, and the betterment of Willow Creek and beyond. Cheers erupted, and Margaret beamed at her side. Edward raised his glass, to the Bennett Foundation and to a future filled with possibility. To the future, the crowd echoed. As the festivities resumed, Catherine felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The shadows of the past had given way to the light of new beginnings. Later that night, as the guests departed and the manor grew quiet, Catherine and Margaret sat together by the fire. Mother would be proud, Margaret said softly. Catherine reached over to squeeze her sister's hand. Father too, I think. They shared a moment of comfortable silence, the bond between them stronger than ever. Margaret tilted her head thoughtfully. Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if we hadn't found each other? Catherine smiled. I believe we were always meant to. Fate has a way of guiding us to where we need to be. Speaking of which, Margaret teased gently, I see things are progressing nicely with Edward. A blush colored Catherine's cheeks. He's a remarkable man, and he adores you, Margaret pointed out. It's about time you let yourself be happy. Catherine laughed softly. Perhaps you're right. The following weeks were a flurry of activity as plans for the foundation took shape. Edward's legal expertise proved invaluable, and together they assembled a board of trustees that included respected members of the community. On a crisp morning, Edward proposed a walk through the estate's woodland trails. The sun peeked through the canopy of trees, casting dappled light upon the path. They strolled companionably, the silence between them comfortable. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, Edward began, his tone serious yet tender. Catherine glanced at him inquisitively. Yes? He paused, turning to face her fully. Catherine Bennett, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Your strength, compassion, and vision inspire me daily. Her heart fluttered. Edward, he took her hands in his. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Emotion welled within her, surprise, joy, and an overwhelming sense of rightness. Yes, she whispered, her eyes shining. Yes, I will. A radiant smile broke across his face as he slipped a simple yet elegant ring onto her finger. They embraced, the world around them fading as they basked in the happiness of the moment. News of their engagement was met with delight by family and friends. Margaret couldn't contain her excitement. This calls for a celebration. As plans for the wedding began, life at Rosewood continued to flourish. The foundation's initiatives were well underway, and the manor had become a beacon of progress and unity. On a sunny spring day, Catherine and Edward exchanged vows in the estate's blossoming garden, surrounded by loved ones. The ceremony was intimate and heartfelt, a testament to the journey they had undertaken together. As they danced beneath the starlit sky that evening, Catherine rested her head against Edward's shoulder. I couldn't have imagined a more perfect day, she sighed contentedly. Nor I, he agreed, holding her close. Margaret watched them from a distance, a serene smile gracing her features. Mrs. Whitfield joined her. They make a lovely couple, don't they? Indeed they do, Margaret replied. It's been a remarkable year. Mrs. Whitfield patted her arm affectionately. And much more awaits. Margaret nodded, hope and anticipation glimmering in her eyes. Yes, I believe it does. Years later, Rosewood Estates stood as a symbol of enduring legacy and positive change. The Bennett Foundation had expanded its reach, touching countless lives through education, art, and community development. Catherine and Edward, now parents to two lively children, balanced their personal joys with their commitments to the foundation and the community. Margaret found her own path, pursuing her passion for music by establishing a conservatory that nurtured young talent from all walks of life. On a warm summer evening, the extended family gathered at Rosewood to celebrate another successful year. Laughter and music filled the air, a tapestry of moments woven together by love and shared purpose. Catherine stood on the terrace, gazing out at the estate, the gardens in full bloom, the lights twinkling like stars brought to earth. Edward joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Penny, for your thoughts." She leaned into him, just marveling at how life has unfolded, how the choices we've made have led to so much happiness. He kissed her temple softly, and to think it all began with a return to Willow Creek. She smiled wistfully. "Sometimes we have to go back to move forward." He nodded, their gazes meeting. "Here's to the past that brought us here, and to the future we'll build together." "To the journey," she agreed. As night embraced Rosewood Estate, the sounds of celebration continued, a chorus of voices and melodies echoing into the night, a testament to the enduring power of family, love, and the courage to forge one's own destiny. We hope this story resonated with you as much as it did with us while creating it. If it moved you, inspired you, or you simply enjoyed every chapter, we invite you to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Your voice is important to us and helps us continue to improve. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Your support is essential for us to keep creating captivating stories like this one. Every subscription and like motivates us to share more adventures with you. Thank you for joining us on this literary journey. And if you're craving more, here is another great story that you're sure to enjoy.